The wind in our valley has a personality. That March morning, it was in a foul mood, rattling the windows and clawing at the loose shingles on my barn. I was out back, wrestling with a loose fence post, the cold seeping through my jacket. In my hand, I held a pair of old lineman's pliers, the rubber on the handles worn smooth. They were a constant heavy reminder. They'd belonged to my old partner, Mike, before the accident on the Cascade line, before a simple stress test went wrong and cost him his legs. I carry that day with me. You know how some memories are? They're not just in your head. You feel them in your bones. That's when I heard it. A high-pitched whine, like a giant, angry mosquito, cutting through the roar of the wind. I looked up. A small drone, maybe the size of a dinner plate, hung in the air directly over my barn. It had the crisp, clean logo of the Homeowners Association stenciled on its side. I'd lived here for 20 years, long before this collection of busybodies decided to turn our quiet corner of the world into their personal kingdom. If you're watching Karenology, you probably know the type. They start with the color of your mailbox and end with the contents of your soul. I stood there, pliers in hand, just watching it. An invasion. A tiny buzzing trespass. And then, as if on cue, the world went silent. My workshop radio died mid-song. The low hum of the freezer in the garage cut out. I heard the solid thunk of the main breaker tripping in my house. The drone hovered for another 10 seconds, its little camera eye seeming to stare right at me. Then it zipped away over the tree line. A moment later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a text. It was an email from the Homeowners Association. The subject line was simple: notice of violation and fine. My heart didn't sink. It got cold and heavy, like a block of iron. The email stated that a routine aerial inspection had identified an unauthorized and unsafe electrical mast on my barn. It was a $3,000 fine, but that wasn't the punchline. Oh no, that came at the end. As a precaution, it read, "Your property's power has been remotely disconnected. Service will not be restored until the violation is rectified and certified by an approved inspector." They didn't just fine me, they cut me off. Have you ever been in a situation where someone else holds the switch to your life? To the warmth of your home, the food in your fridge? It's a unique kind of powerlessness. I'm an electrical engineer. I've spent 30 years stress testing power grids from Oregon to Arizona. I designed and built my own system. It wasn't just safe, it was bulletproof. And this was a declaration of war. A war started by a woman named Brenda. Brenda was the head of the association's Green Committee, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair that never seemed to move, even in a gale, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her big project was getting the entire community to switch to a single, approved solar energy provider. A provider she just happened to have a very, very close relationship with. This wasn't about a beige barn. It was about a green bottom line, hers. I knew it, but knowing something and proving it are two different worlds, aren't they? The next day, their approved inspector showed up. A young guy with a polo shirt 2 sizes too tight and an air of unearned authority. He didn't bring any diagnostic tools. He just walked around, squinting at my mast, making little tisk-tisk sounds. "Yeah, this is old," he said, shaking his head. "Really old. It's a risk to the whole grid, you know. Could cause a surge." I just looked at him. This system is isolated with 3 layers of surge protection and has been running without a single fault for 22 years. The only surge around here is the one in your ego. He didn't like that. His phony sympathy vanished. He pulled a glossy brochure from his clipboard. "Look," he said, his voice flat. "Brenda and the committee are willing to waive the fine if you upgrade. We have an approved contractor. They can get you set up with a new solar array, $30,000, and all your problems go away." It was the cleanest, most beautifully packaged extortion I'd ever seen. I almost had to admire the nerve. Almost. I took the brochure, looked at the smiling, generic family on the front, and handed it back to him. "No, thank you." His smile became a thin line. He glanced at my old, weathered barn, then back at me. A little flicker of something nasty in his eyes. "Suit yourself," he said, turning to leave. "But that's a nice old barn. It'd be a real shame if there was a fire, you know, from faulty wiring." He let the words hang in the cold air. I felt the weight of Mike's pliers in my pocket. Some threats aren't loud. The quiet ones are the ones that get under your skin. He walked away, and I was left in the silence, with a dead house and a $3,000 hole in my bank account that was about to get deeper. I knew this was just the beginning, but what I didn't know was that the real fight wasn't about the wires I could see. It was about the ones buried deep beneath the ground, hidden for over 60 years. He left, and the silence he left behind was heavier than before. It wasn't just the lack of electricity. It was the silence of being utterly alone against something organized and ugly. The first thing I did was call my power company. A very tired-sounding woman on the other end of the line listened patiently before telling me what I already suspected. The disconnect order had come directly from the Homeowners Association, citing a community bylaw regarding grid safety. There was nothing she could do. It was, in her words, a civil matter. Civil. Funny word for it. There was nothing civil about what was happening. My food was spoiling. The nights were cold. I was running a few essentials off a gas generator, but the constant noise and the smell of exhaust felt like a surrender. What would you have done? Sometimes the most logical path feels like a trap. If you've ever been in a fight where the rules are written by your opponent, you know what I mean. I decided to take the fight to them. The community had an online forum, a place usually reserved for arguments about lawn maintenance and lost cats. I wrote a post. I laid out the facts calmly and clearly. The drone, the immediate power cut, the fine, the sales pitch from the inspector. I attached a scan of my own master electrician license. I explained in simple terms why my system was safe. I thought facts would matter. I was wrong. The first few replies were sympathetic. But then the tide turned. It started with a post from Brenda herself. "We take the safety of our residents very seriously," she wrote. "It's a shame Mr. Peterson puts his own stubbornness above the well-being of his neighbors." Then came the chorus. One person claimed their lights had been flickering for weeks. Another said their TV had fried during a power surge. All lies, but in a forum, the first lie often wins. My professional website, where I get freelance consulting work, was suddenly flooded with one-star reviews. Unsafe practices, cut corners, almost burned down my house. All anonymous, all posted within the same hour. It was a coordinated attack. Then the brownouts started. It was clever, not a full blackout, just a dimming. The lights would flicker and fade for a few minutes every evening, always around dinner time. It only affected a handful of houses on my street, the older ones, the ones with systems like mine. Brenda's Green Committee was all over the forum. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. Mr. Peterson's outdated system is destabilizing the local grid. He's putting everyone at risk." They were manufacturing a crisis and handing me the blame. It was brilliant in a sickening way. The breaking point came a few days later. I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw my neighbor, Jim, pulling weeds in his front yard. We'd been neighbors for 15 years. We'd shared beers over this very fence. He saw me, and for a second, he looked like he was going to wave. Instead, he stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and just stared at me. "You need to fix this, Frank," he said, his voice low and tight. "My wife's mother is on an oxygen machine. We can't have the power going out." "Jim, it's not me," I said, leaning against the car door. The cold metal felt unforgiving. "It's them. It's a setup." He just shook his head, not with disbelief, but with disappointment. "I don't care who it is. Just fix it. Pay the fine, do the upgrade, whatever it takes. We can't live like this." He turned and walked back to his house without another word. That hurt more than the fine, more than the anonymous attacks online, the loss of trust from someone you know. It leaves a hollow space inside you. That night, sitting in the dark, the silence of the house was deafening. The old pliers were on the table next to me. I thought about Mike, about the one time I missed a detail, the one variable I didn't account for, and the price he paid. Now I was being accused of the very thing I'd spent my life trying to prevent. It felt like a ghost had come back to haunt me. I knew I couldn't fight their lies with words. I needed a different kind of truth, an official one, an unbiased one. I decided to call the county code enforcement office myself. I would pay for an independent official inspection. Let a real licensed city inspector come out and put their seal on a report that said my system was safe. Their paper would beat Brenda's paper. The next morning, I was about to make the call when I heard the mail slot click. I walked to the door and picked up the single envelope on the floor. It was from the homeowners association. I expected another fine, another threat. I tore it open. It was worse. It was a formal notice of pending lien against my property for failure to comply and ongoing safety violations. They weren't just trying to bully me anymore. They were coming for my home. The notice of lien wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a legal countdown. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This had escalated. It was no longer about a fine or an electrical mast. It was about losing everything. Still, I stuck to my plan. An official inspection was my only way out. I called the county and requested a full electrical inspection of my property. I paid the fee over the phone. They said they'd send someone out within 48 hours. That someone was a young man named Mark. He arrived in a beat-up county sedan, carrying a heavy-duty diagnostic kit that looked like it had seen its share of battles. He wasn't like the homeowners association's polo-shirted stooge. He had the tired, patient eyes of a man who'd seen every kind of electrical sin imaginable. He didn't say much at first. He just worked. He spent 2 hours going over every inch of my system, from the main panel to the grounding rods to the connections in the barn. He ran load tests, checked for resistance, and peered at my wiring through a thermal camera. I stood by, watching, the silence punctuated by the clicks and beeps of his equipment. It felt like waiting for a jury to come back. "You know," he said finally, pulling his head out from behind the main panel, "this is old school, over-engineered. You could probably power half the block with this setup, and it wouldn't break a sweat." A wave of relief washed over me. "So it's safe?" "Safe? It's safer than most of the new builds I see. The wire gauges are thicker, the breakers are commercial grade. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." He pointed to a junction box. "There is one thing, though. This type of enclosure, it's not up to the 2018 code revision. It was fine when it was installed, but technically it's outdated." He tapped his pen on his clipboard. "It's a 5-minute fix, a $20 part from the hardware store. You do that, and I can sign off on this with a clean bill of health." Hope. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "I'll go get the part right now," I said, already reaching for my car keys. He held up a hand. "Let me be straight with you, Frank. I got a call this morning from my supervisor. He got a call from someone on your homeowners association board. Brenda, I think her name was." He looked uncomfortable. "They're leaning on him hard. They want this inspection to fail. He wants me to find a reason, any reason." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can sign off that it's safe once you fix that enclosure. It's the truth. But they're not going to like it. It could get messy for me." I understood immediately. He was caught in the middle. He was offering me a way out, but it came with a risk for him. What do you do when doing the right thing could cost someone else their job? Have you ever had to make a choice like that? "Do what you have to do, Mark," I told him, my voice quieter than I intended. "Just be fair." He gave me a short, grim nod and started packing up his gear. The next day I waited. The knot in my stomach was back. Around noon, Mark's county sedan pulled up again. He got out and walked toward me, holding a single piece of paper. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just handed me the official report. I scanned the page, my eyes jumping to the summary box at the bottom. My heart dropped. 3 words were checked in bold letters: critical safety hazard. "Mark, what is this?" I could hear the crack in my own voice. "You said it was safe." He finally looked at me, and his face was pale. "I'm sorry, Frank," he whispered. "They called my boss again. They told him they'd file a formal complaint against the county, against me personally. Said I was taking kickbacks. My boss caved. He told me to fail it, or he'd find a reason to fire me." He looked down at his shoes. "I've got a wife, a new baby. I can't lose this job." He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked back to his car, leaving me standing there with the lie in my hands. It was the perfect weapon, a document signed and sealed by a county official that said my home was a death trap. It wasn't a recommendation, it was a verdict. I felt the ground give way beneath me. They had beaten me. They had used the system, a good man's fear, and a piece of paper to corner me completely. That night, the wind howled around the house again, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside me. In the darkness, alone, I finally understood. I couldn't win this fight by their rules, so I would have to use my own. I went to the barn, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom, and started digging through old metal filing cabinets I hadn't opened in 30 years. I wasn't looking for a document. I was looking for a memory. The filing cabinets were cold and damp, smelling of rust and forgotten time. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A clue, a loophole, anything. My flashlight beam danced across old invoices, faded blueprints for projects long completed, and manuals for equipment that was now museum-worthy. It was a tour through my own past, a life spent wrangling electrons. Most of it was useless, but then my fingers brushed against a thick, cardboard-bound folder tucked away at the very back of the bottom drawer. It wasn't one of my files. It belonged to the house itself. I pulled it out. The label on the front, typed on an old manual typewriter, read, "Property and Outbuildings, Original Survey and Permits, 1958. I carried it back to the house, setting it on the kitchen table under the stark light of my battery-powered lantern. It was full of brittle yellowed papers. There was the original deed, the septic plans, the well permit. And then I found it. A single-page document with a faded government seal at the top. It wasn't a permit for the barn. It was a designation. The barn, according to this official paper from the Department of Civil Defense, was classified as a Regional Emergency Communications Relay Station. It took a moment to sink in. This wasn't just a barn. During the Cold War, this harmless-looking structure was part of a national defense network. It was designed to be a backup communication hub in case of a major catastrophe. The electrical masts they were so intent on removing, it wasn't for my personal use. It was an antenna mount for a long-range radio system. Suddenly, it all made sense. The over-engineered power system, the thick concrete foundation, the odd metal conduits running under the floor. My simple barn was a relic of a forgotten era of fear and preparation. But was it still an active designation? Or just a historical footnote? Funny thing is, when you're cornered, you start thinking differently. The game board changes. I spent the next 2 days on a deep dive, not into local codes, but into federal archives. I made calls. I sent emails. I hit more dead ends than I could count. Most people I talked to had no idea what I was talking about. Civil defense? That was ancient history. But then, a helpful clerk at the National Archives, a woman who sounded as old as the documents she curated, found a reference. She pointed me to a little-known piece of legislation, the Strategic Communications Preservation Act of 1974. The act was designed to protect critical infrastructure from being dismantled, even after its primary purpose was obsolete. It stated that any structure once designated as a critical communications hub could not be altered, modified, or decommissioned without a formal review by a federal commission. Not the county, not the state, the feds. And alteration was defined broadly. It included structural changes, significant rewiring, and even painting. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. Brenda and her committee, in their greedy little quest to force a solar panel sale, had stumbled into a hornet's nest they didn't even know existed. They weren't just picking a fight with a retired engineer. They were messing with a piece of United States federal property. What they saw as a beige paint violation was, in the eyes of the law, tampering with a national security asset. While I was digging into the past, Brenda was solidifying her victory in the present. Armed with Mark's falsified report, the Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting. I didn't go. I knew what would happen. They voted unanimously to authorize their lawyers to place the lien on my house and to begin foreclosure proceedings if I didn't comply within 30 days. The total bill they presented was now a staggering $43,000. The initial fine, daily penalties, the cost of their inspector, and now legal fees. The news spread through the neighborhood like a virus. I was no longer just the stubborn guy with the unsafe wiring. I was the guy who was about to lose his house. A few days later, a new sign went up at the entrance to our community, a big glossy banner announcing the Future of Green Living Fair, sponsored by the Homeowners Association and Sunbright Solar, Brenda's chosen contractor. It was a celebration of their victory, a public relations campaign to cement their power. The centerpiece of the fair was to be a live demonstration of their solar technology. They were going to show everyone the bright, clean future they were building, the one I was standing in the way of. I looked at that sign, at the smiling stock photo family under a glistening solar panel, and I knew that was it. That was my stage. They were building their own Trojan horse, and I was about to fill it with soldiers. I had the law on my side, but I knew a dry legal argument wouldn't be enough. I needed a spectacle. I needed to show, not just tell. The brownouts gave me an idea, a dangerous one, a beautiful, terrible idea. I made one more call, not to a lawyer, but to an old friend at the Federal Communications Commission. I told him I had a story he might find interesting. My friend at the FCC, a guy named Peterson who owed me a favor from an old power grid crisis in Nevada, listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Let me get this straight, Frank," he said, his voice a low whistle. "Your homeowners association is trying to force you to modify a designated Cold War comms station, and they're faking power outages to do it?" "That's the short version," I said. "This isn't a civil matter anymore," he said. "This is a federal issue, tampering with critical infrastructure, causing intentional grid instability. The fines for that make your HOA fees look like pocket change." He told me he would be there for the Green Living Fair, and he wouldn't be coming alone. The day of the fair was bright and cold. The town square was filled with white tents and green banners. Brenda was in her element, gliding between residents with a clipboard and a dazzling smile, her perfectly lacquered nails flashing in the sun. The centerpiece was a large stage where the Sunbright Solar team had set up their demonstration. A mock roof with their panels hooked up to a bank of batteries and a large screen displaying their energy output. It was pure theater. I arrived just as the main presentation was about to begin. I wasn't alone. Walking beside me was Peterson from the FCC, looking stern and official in a dark suit, and a quiet, unassuming woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Dr. Albright, a senior curator from the National Heritage Council. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and all the sound just dies? That's what happened. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Brenda's smile froze on her face. She recovered quickly. "Frank," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "I'm surprised to see you. This is a community event." "I'm here as a member of the community," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "And I have a few questions for your solar experts." I walked toward the stage. The Sunbright Solar CEO, a slick guy in a blazer, tried to block my path. "Sir, this is a private demonstration," he said. Peterson stepped forward and flashed his federal ID. "This is now a federal inquiry," he said calmly. The CEO's face went pale. He stepped aside. I took the microphone. "I'm an electrical engineer," I told the crowd, "and I've been experiencing some interesting power fluctuations lately. I'm curious about the technology you're selling." I turned to the Sunbright CEO. "Your inverters. What kind of total harmonic distortion do they produce under a variable load?" You could have heard a pin drop. He stared at me, his jaw working silently. It was a technical question, but a basic one, and he didn't have the answer. He stammered something about industry standards. "Let's find out," I said. I pulled a small, portable oscilloscope from my bag. It's a device that lets you see electricity. I gestured to their demo setup. "Go ahead, power it up." The CEO looked to Brenda for help, but she was staring at Peterson and Dr. Albright as if she'd seen a ghost. Reluctantly, he flipped a switch. The big screen behind him lit up, showing impressive numbers. I clipped the probes of my oscilloscope to their output line. A perfect clean sine wave appeared on my small screen. "Looks good," I said. "Clean power. Now, let's simulate a real-world load." I reached into my bag and pulled out 3 old industrial-grade heat guns. I plugged them into a power strip connected to their system and turned them all on full blast. The numbers on their big screen dipped. The crowd murmured. But the real show was on my little screen. The perfect wave had turned ugly. It was jagged, filled with sharp peaks and dirty-looking noise. "There it is," I said, turning the screen to the crowd. "Harmonic distortion, electrical noise. When you push these cheap inverters, they dump garbage back into the grid. And what does that garbage do? It trips old, sensitive circuit breakers. It makes your lights flicker. It doesn't just draw power, it poisons the well for everyone else on the line." I turned off the heat guns. The wave on my screen became clean again. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. My neighbor Jim was standing in the front row, his eyes wide. He finally understood. The brownouts weren't my fault. They were a sales tactic. Brenda tried to regain control. "This is absurd, a ridiculous stunt. This man is about to lose his home for safety violations, and he's trying to distract you all with this circus." That was the moment Dr. Albright chose to step forward. She took the microphone from me. Her voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone. "Mr. Peterson is not losing his home," she said. "In fact, any attempt to place a lien on or alter his property is a violation of federal law." She held up a certified copy of the 1958 designation. "His barn is not a barn. It is a protected historical asset of the United States government. And you, madam," she said, looking directly at Brenda, "have been attempting to illegally modify a piece of American history." The color drained from Brenda's face. The perfect smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure panic. I saw her hand go to her neck, her thumb frantically picking at the edge of her thumbnail. The tiny nervous habit I'd noticed before was now a full-blown tell. She was trapped. She had built her own stage, and I had just brought down the house. The crowd wasn't murmuring anymore. They were staring at Brenda, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning anger. The show was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The silence that followed Dr. Albright's announcement was profound. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into a million pieces. Brenda stood frozen, the microphone hanging loosely in her hand. The crowd wasn't a mob, it was a jury, and they had just reached their verdict. My neighbor Jim took a step forward, his face a mask of disbelief and guilt. He looked from me to Brenda and back again. "You lied to us," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the square. "All of us." That single sentence broke the dam. The murmurs erupted into a roar of angry questions. People started shouting, waving their own inflated power bills, demanding answers. The Sunbright Solar CEO, seeing his multi-thousand-dollar contracts evaporating before his eyes, tried to slip away off the back of the stage. But Peterson from the FCC, who had been watching everything with a grim satisfaction, simply put a hand on his shoulder. "I don't think you're going anywhere," he said. The Green Living Fair imploded. People tore down the banners. The Sunbright team scrambled to pack up their demo under a hail of angry questions. Brenda, for her part, simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, her face a blank mask. She wasn't running, she was retreating, calculating. But there was nowhere left to run. The next few weeks were a blur of official activity. The FCC and the National Heritage Council launched a joint investigation. They subpoenaed the Homeowners Association's records, the communications of the Green Committee, and the financials of Sunbright Solar. It didn't take them long to unravel the entire scheme. It was a classic kickback operation. Brenda's committee would manufacture a safety violation, pressure the resident with fines and social ostracism, and then Sunbright would get an exclusive no-bid contract to fix the problem at a grossly inflated price. Brenda received a 10% cut of every contract. The fake brownouts were the masterstroke, creating a sense of urgency and fear that drove people straight into their arms. Mark, the young county inspector, was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. He provided a sworn statement detailing the pressure campaign and how he was forced to falsify my report. His testimony blew the case wide open. The Homeowners Association was hit with massive federal fines for interfering with a protected asset and for its role in the fraudulent scheme. Their insurance carrier, upon learning of the fraud, dropped them like a hot rock. The association was, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt. Brenda and the Sunbright CEO were indicted on federal charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Their assets were frozen. The empire they had built on lies and intimidation crumbled to dust overnight. Funny thing is, the most satisfying moment for me wasn't the news of their indictment. It was a small thing. A week after the fair, a check arrived in my mail. It was a refund from the county for my inspection fee. Tucked in with it was a handwritten note on a plain piece of paper. It just said, "I'm sorry, Frank. Thank you." There was no signature, but I knew it was from Mark. In a world of legal documents and federal charges, that small human gesture meant more than anything. The Homeowners Association was forced into receivership. An independent administrator was appointed to sort out the mess. The lien on my house was, of course, voided. All the fines were canceled. I got my power turned back on. I walked into my house, flipped the switch, and the lights came on with a soft, warm glow. I had won. But what do you do after the war is over? The enemy was gone, but the battlefield remained. The community was fractured, filled with suspicion and resentment. I had exposed the truth, but the truth had left scars. The administrator overseeing the HOA's dissolution approached me with a proposition. They needed to form a new interim board to rebuild the community's trust and finances. They wanted me to head it. "You're the only one everyone trusts right now," she said. It was a tempting offer, the power to rebuild things the right way, the power to ensure something like this could never happen again. Have you ever been offered the very thing your enemy craved? Power, control, the keys to the kingdom. For a moment, I considered it. I could be the new Brenda, but a benevolent version. I could make the rules. But as I looked out at the houses in my neighborhood, at the faces of people I'd known for years, I realized that wasn't the victory I wanted. I didn't want to be in charge. I just wanted my quiet life back. I wanted the peace I had before a drone buzzed over my barn and turned my world upside down. I thought about the old pliers in my workshop, the ones that reminded me of failure, of the weight of responsibility. I had carried that weight for years. I didn't want to pick up a new one, even if it came with a crown. I looked the administrator in the eye and gave her my answer. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm an engineer, not a politician." Her surprise was genuine. I think she expected me to jump at the chance. Instead, I made a counteroffer. I would help them find the right people, honest people, neighbors I knew and trusted, to form a new transparent board. I would serve as a technical consultant for free to help them draft new fair bylaws. But I wouldn't sit on the throne. Victory for me wasn't about taking power. It was about giving it back to the community where it belonged. It was a long, slow process, the rebuilding. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. There were still neighbors who looked at me with a hint of resentment, as the man who had brought federal scrutiny and financial ruin down on our quiet valley. They didn't see the fraud, they just saw the fallout. But others like Jim made a point to stop by. He showed up at my door one Saturday with a 6-pack of beer. He didn't say much. He just handed it to me and said, "I'm sorry, Frank, I should have listened." We stood on my porch and drank a beer in silence, and it was enough. Brenda's trial was short. Faced with a mountain of evidence and Mark's testimony, she and her business partner took a plea deal. They got 5 years in a federal prison. I never saw her again. The last I heard, her house had been sold to cover her legal fees and the restitution she was ordered to pay back to the community. Her perfect manicured world had been completely dismantled. As for my barn, it became something of a local legend. The National Heritage Council, as part of their settlement with the now-defunct Homeowners Association, allocated a small fund for its preservation. They didn't want to turn it into a museum. They just wanted to make sure it remained standing, a silent monument to a forgotten piece of history. They sent a crew out to stabilize the foundation and repair the roof, and they installed a small, discreet bronze plaque next to the main door. It didn't mention me or the Homeowners Association. It simply read, Oak Valley Communications Relay Station, U.S. Civil Defense Network, 1958-1974, a silent watch. One evening, a few months later, I was in my workshop, cleaning my tools. The air smelled of oil and wood shavings. The light was warm. The radio was playing softly. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I had fought for. I picked up the old lineman's pliers, Mike's pliers. I ran my thumb over the worn rubber handles. For years they had felt heavy with guilt, a reminder of a failure. But holding them now, they felt different, lighter. They were just tools. A tool I had used to fix a fence and, in a way, to fix my own life. I walked outside. The wind was gentle that evening, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I looked at my barn, standing dark and solid against the twilight sky. The controversial electrical mast was still there, untouched. The bronze plaque glinted faintly in the last light of day. I had won, but it had cost me. It had cost me friendships that would never be the same. It had cost me the simple anonymity I once cherished. I was no longer just Frank, the quiet engineer. I was that guy who took on the Homeowners Association and won. A small price to pay, maybe, but a price nonetheless. I went back inside and put the pliers back in their place on my tool bench, not hidden away in a drawer, but right there, in the open. They were no longer a symbol of a past I couldn't change, but of a future I had earned, a future where the lights stay on, the rules are fair, and a man's home is his own. And sometimes, in this crazy world, that's the only victory that matters. If you've ever had to fight for your own little corner of peace, well, you know what I'm talking about. Let me know in the comments. I appreciate you listening.